So we wanted to debate it further here, and please, while this is, so we're going to do a panel style. I'm going to focus on a few people. Obviously, if you have questions or comments, please drop them into the chat that we can, and we'll pull those up and try and address them as we go here. The context that we came up with this for this kind of ERP OMS Smackdown is the two were, a retailer that has an ERP that's likely been, a mainframe or some custom application, and is now running an OMS across their omnichannel operations. That's the first context. And the second one would be a mature B2B player, someone that's likely got a package, an SAP or something, that's now considering growing their DTC business, may or may not have stores. So these are the typical two use cases that we see here when people are debating how far to lean in. What do they use an OMS for? What do they use an ERP for? Should they be overlapped? Should they not be overlapped? And so that's the discussion we want to have today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to we have four panelists today, Laxman, Dylan, James, and Ed, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. So Dylan, why don't you go first?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dylan. I've been in product management for over a decade now. Spent a lot of time in retail operations as well. Did some major transformations at companies like Guitar Center. So when I'm debating Laxman, that's going to be an interesting one because he is involved in the same. Express, and most recently Gap. And a lot of really exciting changes have happened over that decade plus in order management itself. But I think we still run into a lot of the same problems that were coming up in the beginning as well. So it's a really interesting path of evolution, I'd say, for this space that's happened. And I think we're, to Darko's point, at that point where we're at a tipping point. We can push it over the edge if we have the right minds working together.
Cool. All right. James, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So James, or Jim Brochu, whatever you want to call me, I respond to most things. Here's the thing. I thought this was a support group for OMS trauma survivors. So no, I'm just kidding. I'm probably the only OMS expert on here, one of the few who's a second generation OMS expert. A lot of people on here know Doug Brochu. I've built a couple of practices and companies with him centered around the OMS space. Through that 14, 15 year tenure, I've done everything from B2B highly complex order management implementations down to multinational retail multi-brand implementations and everything in between. So I've seen it all, suffered through it all, and happy to help others learn from where I've struggled.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Ed, do you want to go next?
If I have to. Ed Hazard, Director of Engineering at BJ's Wholesale Club. Work a lot in the Sterling space now, a lot with microservices. Have kind of run the gamut from in-house developed applications to partner developed applications, purely in the omni-channel space primarily. So supporting e-commerce sites and kind of working in that space. But I'm also very excited about this group and kind of learning more as we go along.
All right. Thanks, Ed. Laxman, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Chap. Hi, everybody. Laxman Mandayam. I like Jimmy's description. I'm going to be here every month if this is the trauma group. Because as Dylan said, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of scars, and love kind of sharing experiences and sharing knowledge here. So background wise, have been in this space for quite a while, product management, professional services for most part. And have been involved in several implementations with Best Buy. I see Boris here, so I was just messaging him. Haven't seen him in so many years, and it's nice to see. And Guitar Center, so many implementations. So really happy to be here and chat about this stuff. Cool.
All right. Lastly, I'll just say briefly, I'm gonna do my best moderating this. I'm Chap Achen. Been around. My career has been mostly in the retail side of order management on business operations. And like Laxman, it's just fun to see all these faces in the OMS domain. So with that, we're going to get going. Our first question is around sourcing. So let me just grab this here. I'm going to, all right. So this question is going to be for Dylan and Laxman to weigh in. Dylan, I'll let you give your thoughts first. So if we think, obviously the ERP and OMS do have some overlaps in their footprint, which is what prompted this discussion. I think the biggest overlap is in the sold order spacing, in the sold order domain. And I'd like you guys to make an argument for or against a company running an OMS and ERP side by side, each with some doing a subset of sourcing. Again, we're talking about sold orders, not procurement-based orders. But what would be an argument, make an argument for or against running those systems side by side with each doing some subset of sourcing? So Dylan, if you want to weigh in on that, that'd be great to get us started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So one piece of context I think is important here is watching the trail of modernization within something like an OMS compared to e-commerce when you look into headless and then further into composable environments. And it just, we don't feel like we're running at the same pace within there. And what's really interesting is you'll have a retailer. So if we take that first context of the retailer who's on whatever level of ERP that they already have running. First, you have from a sourcing standpoint, anytime you go to run into your ERP, so for everybody who should know this here, right? Your enterprise resource planning. When we think about resources, it's a highly financial system too. And so when you're fighting a CFO to put in anything for a new capability, but then you're saying, hey, I'm going to go touch our system that impacts our general ledger as well to accomplish this. There's a change management accomplishment to go in there. It doesn't mean that you can't. For sure, just to give an example, when we were at Guitar Center, before we put in OMS, we had 2 ERPs running because of acquisitions. So there was one that was direct to consumer and there was one that was stores. And we had to figure out how are we not going to disrupt the entire company by doing a total migration of ERP potentially for this, because there was an argument that Microsoft Dynamics at the time could have probably taken on some of what we were doing. And we did have a homegrown system running in parallel at the time, not a full OMS, but was doing things like sourcing. And that was kind of the argument, is it hasn't been able to reach the flexibility of the movements we need in our workflow to be able to have this be a live operational program without being disruptive to something that runs financial. So to me, for most companies that have matured to a certain degree, you're going to be, I think, safe having that duplication and potentially a new route of sourcing, new thought process of sourcing associated with orders themselves. I do want to back up though, because this is really, I'm always going to take everything obviously from a product management standpoint, being my background, and it's really an evaluation of your needs and your outcomes. SMB, small and medium businesses may not have the need, they may not have the complexity associated with something that requires an order management system. So they may have had 1-2 stores, something like that, something small, and they're running their financials off of some system, and that system maybe they're running a NetSuite or something, and it can be able to accomplish without getting a whole new platform the sourcing needs that they have. It's a lower investment, but there's obviously that risk of diving into your financial system itself. So my initial response to this is it depends on the player, where their maturity is, and how complex they're going to be running within the sourcing. I do want to underline this does not mean that ERPs cannot have complex sourcing. They can have massive complexities in the sourcing. But my experience has been to be able to change that on the fly, to be able to get the most value and to be able to address things like, the costs associated with fulfillment in each order has been more flexible on the order management side. So from a growth tool, I think order management definitely flexes harder.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And Laxman, I'm going to let you weigh in here. And when you do, I want you to just think about one of the things I was trying to get at with that question is if you choose to dual source ERP and OMS to do some subset of sourcing, the implication is that you've likely cut your inventory visibility across those two systems, so they're not they're not trying to grab from the same fulfillment and inventory resources, which obviously degrades the overall efficiency of the operation. That seems to, that's always going to be a trade-off that you're making, I would think. So Laxman, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I would love to also hear from some other folks here at Chap, but I'll tell you, I think I want to piggyback on what Dylan said. I think the argument on one side or the other really depends on kind of the context, right? So I think, like Dylan said, I think ERP is very good at doing complex things, but in like batch type scenarios where, so for example, if you have a B2B type environment where you're not fulfilling orders same day, next day, 2 days, you've got orders with like committed dates, potentially with like longer lead times. Also, you don't have like 500 locations or 1,000 locations you're fulfilling from. You're maybe fulfilling from 4 or 5 DCs, right? Those are scenarios where I think, and you have also complexity around like fair share allocation. I don't know what all types of logic you may have. You may have a contractual SLAs and things like that. An ERP is really good at that type of stuff, right? And then when you take our current day B2C environment, direct to consumer environment, where you have customers wanting stuff like really fast, you have thousands of orders, you have a lot of sources of or options for where an order can be filled from. There's a plethora of choices from services mixed up with like orders, bundles, all types of stuff. That's where I feel like an OMS is really good at like being fast and being like intelligent about how to manage a big distributed network. So I feel like from when you talk about like argument for running these in parallel, it would depend on an environment where say a brand that has D2C, that has stores, that has wholesale, they may need to really leverage an ERP to do a initial level sold order sourcing to figure out where to pull inventory from, right? But then when you come down to like filling orders that are like, a customer, consumer orders, there you might want like more of the agility that Dylan, you were talking about, right? Like how do you do things fast? How do you do things, in real time that OMS is really good at? So I feel like it's kind of a mix of both. Now I know when I look at the faces here, the names here, I know Doug has a lot of stuff to say. I'm sure Gio has a lot of stuff to say. Many folks here would have a lot of stuff to say here, but yeah, I'll let Dylan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I know we said we weren't technically doing hands, but trying to
Go ahead.
work through this as we can. I think one interesting thing to add on to there, and back to your comments, Chap, on some of this focus is it really depends, especially when you look at B2B, it really depends on what your model is for that B2B. If you're doing uniforming, for instance, you're still going to run more similar to in a lot of ways, to a retailer that sells apparel as well. So I got to experience this directly most recently with Gap putting their uniforming business together. And there's a number of different businesses that they've been putting in to diversify their revenue streams. But within doing, it was actually a faster route for us to leverage the exact same commerce path that we have or had for distributing customer orders, because we were ordering into product. I think that was the big difference, is the ERP and our upstream systems were still how we were, to your point. We're not talking about procurement, but that was the ordering as far as procurement is concerned. And we had inventory that was our pool. We always talk about order management is not the owner of the inventory, it's the availability, if you will, right? Or wherever your logical inventory sits. And I think that's a model that would run very well with order management. But to your point, Laxman, things that are slower require manufacturing. I always like to bring up the airline example, right? When Boeing needs to bring together parts from all over to make one, airplane, make a shell in one place and then ship it over to wherever, Charleston, to be able to do the interiors and things like that. All of that needs to be coordinated. Things need to be on time. There's so much cost associated with that falling apart. But then the challenge that you come into there is, okay, so something like an ERP may be a little bit better for that complexity on what they've got going on. But one of the places I've seen people get hung up on is the difference between a customer order and a purchase order inside. Depending on where you live within the business of a company, you hear order and you hear a different thing. But should you? In the end, we need to orchestrate the life cycle of an order. order management systems do that. And we're having this conversation because it's getting at a point where the overlap is significant enough to be able to have the conversation. Don't want to get ahead of us, and we have other discussions about this later, but I feel strongly that if we're going to lean towards an environment back to the composable architecture that companies are moving towards, where we want to be able to limit the time, risk, money associated with making a change from a capability standpoint, maybe it's neither of them. Maybe it's something we can call something that's completely different. It doesn't really matter what it is, but sourcing is a capability. And when we think about the capability domain, is that ERP? Is that OMS? Might not be either. It might be a service that's required to be able to accomplish both.
Yeah. Anybody want to, Ben, there's been some great comments I've seen in here that we're capturing. After the meeting, we'll be able to we're going to turn this into a bigger piece from some of these comments. So thank you. Anyone want to speak before we transition into the next question? All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Russ wants to speak. Just interesting topic, and I was just making some notes from my previous experiences. And again, ERP and OMS are just two very different things. And I think context, somebody mentioned, is going to be very relevant to when they come together and where they come together. But just kind of highlighting the differences, right? B2B, B2C. The most common differences, if you will, are order sizes are very different, right? And network design or flexibility in the network is very, very different. Delivery timelines are very different when it comes to typical B2B. The way you recognize, financial recognition processes, how you capture payments, again, kind of the difference. Systems you talk to integrate with, kind of very different. So those are the reasons why having OMS kind of fill in the holes that ERP has becomes a challenging ask. So it's always been, where is that gap that an OMS can fill, that frankly, at the end of the day, I'll have to pay millions of dollars to customize an SAP, and I don't want to pay SAP, and hence I want an OMS, right? That's where the can I use my OMS? I think business model wise, I see a trend of where larger organizations serve smaller businesses, a L'Oreal serving hair salons, right? And Amerisource serving veterinarians, right? So wherever you have that kind of B2B alignment, and suddenly service levels are becoming an important part of fulfilling that demand, you can see an OMS certainly playing a role, because this whole idea of servicing different service levels is not something ERP understands, right? So that's clearly an area where OMS can kind of play a role. In my past life, I think a couple of examples, it's been very pointed. ERP couldn't do segmentation, inventory segmentation very well between different channels. So let's do an OMS, but then inventory integration became a pain. There was some very tactical needs, like because WMS integration is hard. Oh, I have already got an OMS that integrates well with WMS. I have this pack and hold process. I don't want to release orders to WMS easily, or SAP does not understand split shipments. Believe it or not, it still doesn't, I think, understand split shipments. So again, those pointed areas where just making changes to ERP is extremely hard. I have an OMS, or I can bring in an OMS and make those processes simple, is where I can see these kind of come together. That's kind of my experience on when I think of these insights.
Can I make just a quick response to that? And we can move on.
Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it just real quick is, I think you're covering some really good points here, and that's again where we're at in the technology journey right now. It's almost like the entire ecosystem, if you made a human for every platform we have at a retailer or B2B, and you were going to take that family photo together, the OMS and the ERP are kind of like the two with their shoulders pushing against each other and trying to nudge each other out of the middle itself. And it's really interesting because you go down the route of the ERP, to your point on split shipments. Companies that have needed to do that within the ERP, I've actually separated into sub orders on the
That's
smaller
right.
side, right, of it. But now you've hacked in how your order looks and lives. And so your end state order from a financial standpoint needs all this reconciliation to run through, where that can be reconciled into another system like an OMS and then moved in. So it's still one order that has that final financial record. But yeah, the push from a platform, and I think it's something a lot of retailers with a lot of trouble right now because they're not thinking differently, and their horizon vision for where they're going as a company is not far enough out. And just they haven't been thinking about what's going to happen, and now it's happening to them. And it's not a great place to be. Software companies, the exact same thing. At some point, you got to stop thinking about the platform and what value you're providing. And you may have a suite of tools that pivots on a platform, so you can have something centralized that encourages more sales. Obviously, people want to make more money, but like in the end, exposing the capability is where the differentiator is going to come from. And whoever ERP or OMS takes this on first, fastest, and with most wins on those pieces is going to inch out the other one. And I think OMS is on a journey already that poises them to be able to do this. But you never know, ERP company could be working on something in the background that none of us know about and come out with it soon.
Well, that's a good segue to our next question, which is basically, is the future of these two applications going to be that they continue to build out their own functional footprints that continue to encroach upon each other's territory, and people are going to use the business context to decide which of that toolkit to use? Or are we going to get away from packaged applications in general and move to a set of composable services? You know, Dylan mentioned sourcing as the example, and or payments, inventory, etc. Are we is the either do we feel that's where the industry's headed, or do we feel the industry's headed more towards composable? Obviously, there's going to be a mixture of both, but if there were to be a trend out there, which way do you think the industry needs to go? And I'm going to let Ed, you weigh in first on this one.
Yeah, I mean, look, I hope that's the trend, right? Like that Dylan kind of led into the last question as well, right? Look, if all I want is a salad, I want to buy the salad. I don't want to buy the whole salad bar, right? I'm not going to pay for the whole salad bar. So I'm either going to go somewhere that's going to give me just a salad, or I'm going to go home and make the salad myself, right? And that's really what we're talking about here. So I really hope that it is kind of that trend towards the composable architectures, the very small dedicated services. Again, it's going to depend on the size of the organization, kind of the goals of the organization, et cetera. But nothing from an OMS perspective or even an ERP perspective is 100% for 100% of its clients, right? You're always buying a lot more stuff than what you're using, or you have to go do, a ton of customization to get it to work for your business. So why take that up on such a big stack when you can just focus on small areas and kind of iterate that way? That's why.
Yeah. Okay. James, I'm gonna let you weigh in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ed, you kind of hit it right on the head, right? Why have this giant solution for such small, discrete problems? We've had a lot of good analogies. The salad bar one is great. The one that was kind of coming to mind for me was kind of when we asked this question, ERP or OMS. What I hear in the back of my head is kind of, the king is dead, long live the king, because you still have the need for those applications, even in a composable world, because composable applications are coming along, and are coming along really well, right? We have deep functionality, deployable, headless, API first, but bringing those applications together into functional use cases in a rapid, repeatable, and controllable way, that's really lagging behind. And I think that's starting to become the role more and more of these feature-rich and robust, broad platforms like ERP and OMS. They're doing a lot of things well, and then they're plugging and playing those microservices where and when it makes sense. We all touched on the sourcing use case earlier today, and it hit close to home because one of our customers, their system is tuned, built for large, high volume, long lead time orders that don't change very often, right? And then they had a Tuesday in May, of all times, Tuesday in May, and an influencer tweeted about their product. and they suddenly had millions of orders coming in, which were single SKU, single item products with rapid lead times. And let's be honest, it didn't go well because they had built their system for one thing. And I think that's where the composable architecture really will shine and prove itself and take over more and more of the ecosystem over time. But I think my theory is that these OMSs and ERPs will start to look more and more almost like a service mesh in the background. And everyone mentioned Yantra earlier on. Yantra did really well at that because it had that service definition framework, right? It had the composability before composability was really a word. And I think we'll see a return to that. Who knows, maybe even to everyone's point, someone will bring back Yantra, the product, and make it a composable service mesh. So that's kind of my take on it.
Interesting, really interesting. And yes, that was me that made the Yantra reference. Dylan, go ahead. Give us your take on this, Dylan.
Yeah, again, piling on because we kind of led into this, but I think one of the important, what I see if I was to look out to the distance of OMS, for instance, is, and this is very tied into, getting back to like Yantra frameworks and things like that. But I think OMS would and should evolve into the order lifecycle management itself, because all the other composable capabilities are plugins and plugouts, right? Like it's you see it today. People are already buying because their order management system isn't doing the sourcing that they want to do. They're buying some other tool that does the sourcing that they want to do. They're buying another tool for their fulfillment orchestration itself as you get into last mile delivery and things like that. They're already doing that, but the life cycle management still needs a home. When we look at the capability domains of an entire company and you look at the full architecture, there needs to be a place that's order. And unfortunately today there's a place that's order, there's a place again that's purchase order, and then there's these overlaps that come between there. And so you don't have this really clean architecture associated with your capabilities and the domains that they live in. And we need to get to a point where an order is an order is an order, regardless of who the end shipment makes it to. And then all of this other stuff is just relative to that pipeline. It's some punch out to whatever service or tool that we need. That's the same framework that you see a lot of e-commerce sites moving to. They were originally doing where we're kind of at right now with OMS, right? Where there's a lot of services, but you're still on one platform. So you've got this monolith in the background. You're trying to get rid of the monolith by going headless. And you got this monolith that's got a lot of services. So you just drew a UI on top of it. But now you look at a lot of the headless platforms are actually splitting up their functionality so that they can be composable. And yeah, you can switch out something else to move. I think OMS needs to take that next step, needs to say, I own order, has to have that polite conversation with ERP. And frankly, companies that have ERPs that don't dip into order management can probably dip in by saying, we're going to separate out the function of order lifecycle management. And we're going to reset in here, and they can be competitive from that. And maybe they don't do any of the other stuff, but then they make it easier for people who are already on their ERP to be able to stretch into that lifecycle management and connect through, and they can maintain with customers. But from the composability standpoint, I do agree completely, Jim, that it's not as simple as just saying, let's separate out all these capabilities. There's still something that has to have that orchestration.
And do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
Chap, real quick?
Cool.
So Dylan, I think you hit on a thing that almost no one ever talks about, even in this group. We haven't really talked about it yet, which is the business documents themselves are really the important thing, right? And I kind of have a vision 10, 15 years out, wherever it happens. Right now, even with composable, even with ERP, OMS, all of that, we're still bringing data to the applications and then forcing the data to fit into the applications. I'd like to see a point where the business document is the living thing, and we can bring the applications to the data where the data lives, right? Not have those restrictions, not have this either or mentality between applications, but be able to say and, right? Oh, we want to do this with that order or that order. Why shouldn't we be able to? Technical limitations right now is the real answer to that. But I see a future where, where applicationless and the business object is the thing.
Fascinating. Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in on this topic? This is really good discussion. Lots of comments.
I had a question for Pankaj. Pankaj, you're at Target, I believe, and I wasn't sure if Target has a significant B2B business at all. And, I know that, SAP was big at Target at one point. Just wanted to, pick your brain on that. I haven't heard too much about the B2B side of, Target, business. If that is, big or small, I have no idea. It would be great if you can share.
That one. So primarily, I lead the sourcing side of it. We call it like a guest order allocation. So the way we have is we have a guest management system. That's like somebody just talked. It primarily takes care of the order lifecycle management, and sourcing is just an API or a microservice that they call, and then we take care of pretty much figuring out where that ship to home order will get fulfilled from. Right? So it could be stores, it could be fulfillment center, or it could be DBSS.
Got it.
So far, pretty much everything is now homegrown. So I don't think we have anything which is ERP based.
Got it.
I'm going to weigh in here for, I'm trying to make this really, really brief. One, I think there's perhaps a misconception that our ERP is highly financial. I think when we look at our ERP traditionally end-to-end, there's a financial systems component, but at least during the Y2K implementations and all that, and I'm dating myself, there was an approach of best of breed where you had a financial package, right? SAP Finance, Oracle Financials, and then you had a best of breed ERP around allocation, sourcing, and then you even separated WMS in those. And then you had a PDM solution. So again, back in Y2K, we didn't have the concept of a PLM that came in automotive. And then the concept of PIM started to come later on. But when I grew up in wholesale, in manufacturing, wholesale systems in the days where we were implementing wholesale systems for Guess, for Liz Claiborne, for Kellwood, for Nike, whose primary business was 95, 98% wholesale. Even when we implemented OMS at Nike 10 years ago, their e-commerce business was about 1%. Their total retail direct-to-consumer business was about 5%. Obviously, that's changed. So when I think about an ERP, wholesale ERP, and then I think about a retail ERP, right, a merchandise management system, and then when I think about an OMS, physically speaking, I'll try and put this physically, right, with an OMS, direct to consumer, I'm moving units. I mean, if you look at Carter's, they have 9 items per order. If you look at most everybody else, they have 1.2, 1.4 items per order. So I'm moving units. When I look at a retail merchandise management system, right, I'm supplying my stores, right, 20, 500, 700 stores, I'm moving boxes. So if I'm configuring my distribution centers, right, I have units, I have boxes, and then when I'm looking at wholesale from a distribution center, I'm moving pallets. So if you try and mix all of those things into one distribution center, we can imagine the operational, the space managements, the picking and packing complexities that we would have to solve within one facility. Right. And then we get to the items of, right, how do we solve for these logically? How do we filter the orders? How would we stage these orders? Which orders are pack and hold? Which orders are ship immediately? So if I look at it with that lens, then I start to see capabilities within the wholesale OMS that are different and unique than the retail OMS. And then I look at capabilities within the retail OMS that are different from the OMS. And I just finished an ERP selection, a merchandise management ERP selection last week. And I was looking at the pricing complexities. The pricing complexities from a supplier, the pricing complexities from for a small boutique customer, and the pricing complexities to a large customer. So if I was looking, for example, of a Nike, I have very different pricing complexities to a boutique, to a golf shop, to my direct to consumer versus the pricing and contracts that I have to a Macy's, to a Dick's. So if we look at it from that lens, I fail to see much overlap in the demand treatment. Perhaps in the sold order, in the order that's post-allocated, I can see a huge play for the OMS. But prior to that, again, I having grown in wholesale and merchandise systems, I still struggle to see much overlap. And sorry, I was trying to make that brief, but that was longer than I intended.
No, that was terrific. Yeah. Very, very good insights. Yeah, and I think most of us on this call are coming from more on the OMS retail sold order domain. So you brought up a terrific perspective there that I think needs to be considered. You can get to composable, but the composable, the complexity of that composable service is astronomical when you just think about like your example on pricing, right? I mean, that is you 3 different pricing models for a shoe sold into 3 different channels, and how do you have one service manage that? So very interesting. Anybody want to respond to that comment or add more comments here? Yeah,
I think it's it's a very fair comment, and I think the pricing piece, when I go back to composable, we're not there yet, but price is a capability, all right? And so it can right now lives within platforms because its complexity is baked within those platforms, but more and more as we can look at these things and look at how we can evolve, because I think the challenge that you're dead on with is depending on what your business looks like, these things float much different. And like we said in the beginning, you have to analyze the intent, the outcomes, what the business is to go after the right solution. One of the things that I see, and this is still going to tie a little bit back more to like retail compared to B2B itself, but bear with me on this, is I'm seeing more and more B2B companies that are realizing that they can get more revenue to self-serve some of their products, which they're looking for people to e-commerce, essentially D2C, but for B2B purposes. But they're behind in their mentality on that because they're going through the opposite of what you just educated us on, and having to educate themselves on what's the different way I can run here. And my point on the future that we were spinning on within this is ideally we're in a place where something knows order and all the complexities of order and can orchestrate that. Something knows price and all the complexities of price and can orchestrate that. You don't have to be tied to the platform to be able to do so. And then from a sourcing standpoint, I mean, really all of this is data in and out, right? It's just how much data can you take and can you consume and how much work have you put into that data science. At some point, we should be able to transition these pieces of data, or to James' point, go grab the data from the appropriate place in the model that needs to be and work through. And I think that's right now having to go through that variation on a evaluation can be a struggle, because I'm sure you saw some of the ERPs that came through didn't anywhere near do what you were going to need it to do, because their concept may have been in a completely different frame than what you were needing for the solution that you were going after. And so I think getting to a place where we can be more selective about the outcomes themselves and then look at these capabilities is somewhere we need to go. But to your point, we're not there, and it does require this education for people to make the right choice and not get tied into something that kind of does what they need and costs as much as the other business model overall.
And Dylan, if I could add one small thing to that, I couldn't agree more with everything that you said. I think even if we had the perfect applications that were slice and diceable and could handle all of those channel things, we still have the underlying problem right now of the channel and use specific master data, right? The data about an item is different to, who was it, Giovanni, for a wholesale use case that cares more about how can I palletize it, ship it in bulk, do those things, versus a retail shipment versus an order management or a front end channel decision being made or an experience being given to a customer. So there are other problems that we're also dependent on. No matter how far we move our own technology space forward, we've also got to keep an eye on those data plays and make sure that someone is syndicating the right data for the right use cases for us.
Absolutely. And we need to think about where we can simplify too, because it's absolutely right. And here it's a unit, here it's a box, here it's a pallet. All of that is a unit of measurement in the end though, right? Of how much is there, but it's all still a thing. So it's all a unit in the end. One unit just may be multiple units overall. And so when we think about things in the separate units of measurement, which was always funny going through like OMS and ERPs and stuff like that. I'm like, what's the unit of measurement we're using here? We have to go through all those little things. It's all a unit in the end, right? So when you're selling yarn and it's done by the foot or inches or something like that, and people are literally cutting it to be able to send it to you, that's still units. It's just the actual operation changes, not necessarily the measurement of those. And so if we can be in places where we simplify the data and are able to take a step back, we could get to a place where we're able to indicate that for this, the unit is a pallet, for this, the unit is a case, for this, the unit is the actual literal unit itself. And then all of that can play in the same environment. We're just absolutely not there because we're still in a world where we're defining explicitly at the item level, especially in retail, what the unit of measure is.
Right, and I'll add something to that, Dylan, right? Those unit of measure explosions, capabilities, transformations are native to an ERP, right? And again, the direction I see the data sourcing, the data democratization is foundational to this vision. But all those unit of measure, right, transformations, they're part of the evaluation and are native to an ERP, and they have been there for 20, 30 years.
So long as they're
but it's a monolith, right? To your point, it's still a monolith, and that's something that technologically we now have the capability to move away from.
Right. And frankly, what we need to be able to solve is we need to be able to solve retailers who get, I think there was the example brought up of 1 million units being ordered because of something, right now it was a different model originally. Needs to be able to shift on that dime, right? And we need to be able to also do the opposite, where if somebody comes to a site, we always have these orders that come through the e-commerce sites that people are like, oh my God, somebody ordered 700 of this one unit or whatever it is. And it's a real order and it's not fraud or anything. It's like, cool. How are you shipping that with pallets? Well, we don't really operate, right? And so like it goes through that whole thing. And so now you got this manual process happening in the background to be able to repalletize or fake that you broke up, whatever it is. And we shouldn't need to be there. We should be able to just say, this is a pallet, right? Like at this, with how these units are there. And I know an ERP can do that. But when we talk about it's technology, right? We can put the technology anywhere for it. It's where's the right technology and where are we not going to get, kicked in the shins by our head of architecture for, making a decision in the wrong spot.
Ed, were you going to say something there, Ed?
No, it's fine. I think it's some of it too it comes down to the maintenance and maintaining that data within the the ERP does it. It's got to be maintained there, right, in order to kind of make that happen. So I've seen that. I've got 10,000 units of measures in the ERP, but really we're only looking at 2, right? So and you get that 700. If it's not maintained in the ERP that way, then you're running exactly what Dylan said, right?
Yeah.
Just
I think.
Sorry, Chap. Just hearing the conversation, I think, it's starting to, it's appearing to me that I think between that ERP versus OMS, debate, I'm hearing the need for change, a lot more change on the OMS side of things. I'm not hearing, the need for change within the ERP side of things as much. Just something that, seems to, because we've talked about composability and breaking things apart, but all of that seems to be in that OMS domain more than on the ERP side.
Yeah. I think we're going to all go to Wikipedia after this call and change the definition of a unit. Is that what we're going to do? Is that next steps?
Philosophical.
It's that I also, to that point, ERPs don't change, right? They're hard to change. OMS has become easier to change. That's why it's kind of the path of least resistance.
Right, but the argument there is, why couldn't an ERP be made to change more, right? So it's again, what's the right domain ownership, and then taking those steps to really own within there. I'm always gonna push back on what something does, what it was meant to do. The can conversations, because anything technology can do anything, it should it. And then you have to look at too, with sometimes we talk about intent. But like Rogaine, for example, was intended to treat high blood pressure, but the side effect greatly outweighed the original intent. So it went down a different road. Slinkies were originally intended to stabilize nautical instruments on ships, but then it fell off the desk and ta-da, it goes down the stairs, and now you got a toy instead of something that's manufactured into the actual unit itself. So things can have whatever intent they want. When we find the value for it, when we make it standard, we put into practice, that's where that real change is going to come from. And I think there's great arguments for either side, but it's each side just accepting where they fit within the total ecosystem, where they have overlaps that are logical. And if you can compose those right, then you have, good competition, you still have some pushback, but it's not as much about the overlap. It's about which tool is best then at that point. And that's what we all hope that we're in the end, is that it's which tool is best without, or with as few trade-offs as possible to be able to get to what's best.
Right.
Well, and I think that's why we're here,
Good.
right? To invent
Yeah.
that, to solve for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just going to say, I think I'm going to wrap us here, but like, this has been the best framing of this discussion that I have had and heard in a long time. So very interesting. And this is the power of this group, I think. I mean, we just demonstrated it over the last, 45 minutes talking about this topic. When thought leaders can come together, and I mean, like I said, I had my own thoughts about this, but what I just heard today made me think completely differently about it. So I hope many of you got the same reaction. You got some value out of this. So there are so many comments here. I'm not sure how I'm going to figure out how to digest them all and replay them, but we will do our best we'll share this back out, and then we'll try to summarize what we heard in the comments and share it with the broader community. And then we'll continue to extend this dialogue. So with that, we're going to wrap on our first OMG Guru call. I want to thank you all for being here on the inaugural call, and
Thanks, everyone.
we'll keep this. Yeah, thank you. We'll keep this going. Enjoy your weekend, and have a great one. And thanks again for your participation. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Great to meet everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Great to meet
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.